Thank you for joining me for this session on scientific writing skills for young researchers. In my work as a scientific writer at the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, DNDi, I proofread and edit manuscripts with DNDi authors and usually see well over 40 a year. I review articles from throughout the drug development process, from drug discovery through clinical trials to studies in access to treatments. I've been asked to speak to you today to help enhance your scientific writing skills, to help you understand the scientific publication process, and to promote best practice. It is my pleasure to share with you some of the things I've learned over the years, and I thank you for taking the time to join me today. Just as we start, I want you to know that I will make my slides available after the presentation, so you'll have them to refer to in future. The first question is, why does it matter that you communicate your work well? You've invested a lot of your energy, time, and passion into your work, and you want to give yourself the best possible chance to make your results available to others in a way that is clear and accessible. This is also important because to progress in science, you need to publish in journals and present in conferences. And to do this, you need to get past a peer review process. And so you want to make it as easy as possible for the reviewers to understand your work. This means the language and presentation must be clear, concise, and accurate. You are very familiar with your work, so it's clear in your mind, but it's new to your audience, so you need to be careful to present it in a way that is easy to digest. For good or ill, the language of science is English. This 2016 report looked at the impact of publishing in other languages other than English on the citation rate. Now, the citation rate gives an indication of the impact of these papers. They found that articles published in English have a higher number of citations than those published in other languages, when the effective journal, year of publication, and paper length are statistically controlled. They conclude that universities and scientific institutions should improve the teaching of English, especially in the natural sciences. And of course, that is part of the reason that you are here today. So, if you are serious about pursuing a career in science, I would strongly encourage you to take whatever opportunities you can to improve your written English. You can do this even in quite informal ways. If you write a diary or journal, you could try writing it in English. Reading in English is also useful, and not just journals. Reading novels can be an enjoyable way to improve language skills too. On that note, before we get into the nitty-gritty of preparing and submitting manuscripts, we're going to take some time to think about how we write. I'm writing a longer letter than usual because there is not enough time to write a short one. This quote underlines the fact that it takes time and effort to write concisely, but it is worth it because your work will be easier to understand. This skill is also useful when you are confronted by word limits for manuscripts and conference abstracts. It also helps you to avoid writing in a repetitive way. Sometimes in scientific writing, people use a more complicated vocabulary because they think it makes the work sound more authoritative. Actually, it's counterproductive and can make the text harder to understand. Rather, it's better to choose the simplest words possible. Using words with fewer syllables and more straightforward phrasing will tighten your text. Here are some examples of substitutions you can make. So instead of saying presents, you can just say is. important can be replaced by key, supplement by add, numerous by many, utilize or leverage is much better to be replaced by use, frequently or typically, you can say often, culminate, end, ameliorate, improve, commence, begin, and finalize, finish. Another tip is to remove unnecessary words. For example, use only essential adjectives and adverbs and eliminate the rest. So in this example, we can remove the words entire and greatly to give a simpler sentence. In addition, many multi-word phrases can be condensed, as you will see on this slide. So instead of in order to, just put to, as well as can be replaced with and. Both of them, simply say both. Was found to be, was. And so on, you see going through the list here. I'll let you read that. So now I'm going to give you 3 more ways to slim down your text. The first is to refer to your citation at the end of a sentence. In a recent study, Smith et al. 2015 showed that giraffes are larger than squirrels. You can rearrange this to giraffes are larger than squirrels, Smith et al. 2015. The second is similar. Refer to your table or figure at the end of the sentence. In figure 1, we showed that testosterone levels were higher in birds than fish. Becomes testosterone levels were higher in birds than fish, figure 1. And finally, you can reorganize sentences. So, if you find yourself swimming in the ocean, be wary of sharks, becomes be wary of sharks when swimming in the ocean. So now on to how to use tenses. Firstly, be consistent within a sentence and within the whole text. Secondly, use tenses, past, present, and future, exactly as you would in ordinary writing. Use the past tense to report on what happened in the past, what you did, what someone reported, what happened in an experiment, and so on. Use the present tense to express general truths, such as conclusions drawn by you or others, and atemporal facts, including information about what the paper does or covers. Reserve the future tense for perspectives, what you will do in the coming months or years. Typically, most of your sentences will be in the past tense. Some will be in the present tense, and very few, if any, will be in the future tense. Note the difference in scope between a statement in the past tense and the same statement in the present tense. The temperature increased linearly over time refers to a specific experiment, whereas the temperature increases linearly over time generalizes the experimental observation, suggesting that the temperature always increases linearly over time in such circumstances. I'm sure you all know the difference between the active and the passive voice, but when should you use them? Here we have 2 sentences you might find in scientific writing. Which should we choose? Here, in the first example, the focus is on the principal investigator, while in the second, the focus is on the heart rate. Consider above all what you're discussing, your topic, and place that in the subject position. In this case, if the heart rate is the focus, use the passive voice, but if the PI is the focus, choose the active voice. Similarly, should you write, the preprocessor sorts the two arrays, or the two arrays were sorted by the preprocessor. If you're discussing the preprocessor, the active voice is the better option. In contrast, if you're discussing the arrays, the passive voice is better. Similarly, this sentence is hard to read because it has a long subject and the verb doesn't come until the very end. In this section, a discussion of the influence of the recirculating water temperature on the conversion rate of blah, blah, blah is discussed. We can make it easier to read by changing it from the passive to the active voice. So it becomes, this section discusses the influence of blah, blah, blah. To give a clause its full strength and keep it short, don't bury what is happening in a noun, typically combined with a weak verb, as in, the catalyst produced a significant increase in conversion rate. Instead, write, the catalyst increased the conversion rate significantly. The examples here show how an action, state, or occurrence can be moved from a noun back to a verb. So make an examination of, simply examine. Similarly, present a comparison of, is compare. Be in agreement, let's just agree. Perform an analysis of, analyze. Produce an improvement in, improve. Verbs need a subject, which can be either expressed or implied. When the verb is in an infinitive or a participle, so to do or doing, its subject is implied to be the subject of the following clause or the closest noun phrase. In such cases, you need to construct your sentences carefully to avoid suggesting nonsense. So consider these two examples. To dissect its brain, the affected fly was mounted on a Petri dish. After aging for 72 hours at 50 degrees C, we observed a shift in peak values. The first sentence implies that the affected fly dissected its own brain. And the second implies that the authors of the paper needed to age for 72 hours at 50 degrees C in order to observe the shift. To restore the intended meaning while keeping the infinitive or the participle, you need to change the subject of each sentence as appropriate. To dissect its brain, we mounted the affected fly on a Petri dish. After aging for 72 hours at 50 degrees C, the samples exhibited a shift in peak values. So now I'm going to give you some thoughts about singulars and plurals. Usually it's obvious, but there are a few things to think about. So firstly, some common mistakes. Data are plural and research is singular. Think carefully about the subject of the sentence, as this is not always obvious. So in the first example, the list of items is on the desk. You might instinctively want to write are after items, since it's a plural form, but the subject of the sentence is the singular word list. And the same is true for the second example. A bouquet of yellow roses lends colour and fragrance to the room. It's the singular bouquet. In the following two sentences, number is singular and plural, and I'll just explain why. So in the first one, a number is plural because it implies more than one. But in the second sentence, the number is singular because it focuses on one specific figure. I've included a few more slides with tips about how to improve your written English at the end of this PowerPoint deck, which will be available to you after the presentation. So now onto the mechanics of writing a manuscript. Before you start, it's important that you have the story you want to tell clear in your mind. If it isn't totally clear to you, it's going to be a struggle to communicate it to anyone else. It might help you to sketch out your narrative at this point with a few pointers along the way. You might discover that you won't be able to include everything you did. This process can help you start to choose what to include and what you can safely leave out. You also need to identify your target journal, as this will impact how you structure and format your text. Find the author instructions for that journal and read them carefully before starting to write. This will save you a lot of time later on. And agree on who are the right people to include as authors as early as possible to avoid potential problems later on. So, where should you publish your research findings? Other people in your group will certainly be able to guide you in this choice from their experience. Another place to go for inspiration is your reference list. Where are the papers that you are going to cite published? Think too about the importance of your results. Is it worth trying to publish in a higher impact journal? Or if that's unrealistic, you might save yourself from wasting time by aiming for a more modest option. Once you've identified a journal, if you're in any doubt, check its aims and scope to see if your work is suitable. Consult the journal's guide for authors for more detailed information on the types of articles they accept, word limits, and so on. You might like to check the journal's review and publication timelines so that you have a rough idea of how long the process might take. Another issue to consider is the question of open access publishing. Now, there has been a big push in recent years to make the results of scientific research more openly available. Now, I know that the Open Synthesis Network is committed to making sure all data generated is freely available. Ideally, the manuscripts produced about this data would also be freely available. The standard model has been through Gold Open Access Publishing, where the author pays a fee so that readers can access their work for free. However, the costs of this for authors can be a big barrier. I would suggest that if you can publish Gold Open Access, that is ideal. But if you can't afford this, then there are other ways around it. One way is Green Open Access, where you put your accepted manuscript into a public repository. Journals often allow this after an embargo period, but some still charge you a fee for this. You are allowed to upload the version that was accepted by the journal, but before they prepared it for publication. Another alternative is to upload your manuscript to a preprint server just before you submit it to your journal. And you can do this with any manuscript, even ones that you will be able to publish open access afterwards. Preprinting gets your results out immediately to as many people as possible. But of course, at this point, your manuscript has not gone through the peer review process. There are a couple of things to bear in mind. Firstly, check that your target journal is okay with this. Most of them are. And secondly, be clear if you communicate about your preprint that it has not yet been peer reviewed. When choosing where to publish, beware of predatory journals, which exist purely to make money, publish work without proper peer review, and often lack transparency about submission fees. A predatory journal may even contact you and ask you to submit your work. I've given you a couple of links here to help you identify predatory journals. And the second one is to a brief video on the topic that I'm going to show you now.
You've done your research and are ready to publish. Sharing your results with the world is key to the progress of your discipline and to your career. Publishing your work with an untrustworthy journal has the potential to damage your career. With the number of journals growing at around 3.5% annually, and almost 1,000 new journals launching in 2014 alone, how can you choose a trusted journal for your research? Think, check, submit. Before you decide, step 1. Think. Can I trust this journal with my research? Do I need more information before I can decide that this is a trusted journal? Step 2. Check. Does the journal publish research that you would read yourself? Can you tell which organisation publishes the journal? Can you contact them easily if you need to? Does the journal have editorial policies in place? And do they conduct appropriate peer review? Does it charge publication fees, and are they clear about how much they cost? Do you know the names or reputations of any of the editorial board members? Are articles in the journal indexed in any of the services that you use? Step 3. If you can answer yes to most of these questions, then submit. By following these 3 steps, you can identify which journals will reliably publish your work and make an impact in your field. When you finish your next article, remember to think, check, then submit. Check the website for more tips to help you find a trusted journal for your work.
One resource you can use to help you decide about a journal is the Directory of Open Access Journals. This is an extensive index of diverse, high-quality open access journals from around the world. The DOAJ's criteria have become a gold standard for open access publishing. So if you're unsure whether an open access journal is predatory or not, you can check to see if it is listed here. So now on to authorship, which can be a tricky question. It can be very disruptive when there are disagreements about authorship that come at a late stage in the process, because the negotiations around that can delay submission to your journal. So I advise you to agree on the author list as early as possible in the process. The precise criteria for authorship vary according to the discipline and sometimes the journal, but at a minimum, authors should be people who have made a substantial intellectual contribution to the work and who are accountable for the content of the manuscript. So artificial intelligence can't be an author, for example. An administrative role, such as providing laboratory space or funding, or language polishing or proofreading, do not in themselves confer authorship. So I am not an author on the papers that I edit, but I am mentioned in the acknowledgements. In summary, don't leave people off who should be included, and don't add people in who didn't contribute to the work. The American Chemical Society have this nice list of 10 tips for ethical authorship. So we'll just go through them now. 1. Present an accurate and complete account of the research you performed. Make sure your manuscript is as detailed as possible to help others reproduce your work. 2. Make a reasonable effort to provide data, methods, and samples of unusual materials to other authors. Submit your data to a public database whenever possible. 3. Cite everything that is not common knowledge and be sure to acknowledge non-authors for critical contributions to your work. So people who have helped you but who don't qualify for authorship should be mentioned in the acknowledgements section. 4. Identify any unusual hazards inherent in the chemicals, equipment, or procedures used. It's vital that potential risks to public health and safety or the wider environment are reported when publishing research. 5. Provide a well-rounded account of your study in one paper, not several. This saves journal space and helps others find your publications more readily. 6. Don't submit your manuscripts to more than one journal at a time. Wait for a response from the first journal before trying at a second. 7. If you want to critique someone else's work, keep it professional and don't let it get personal. 8. Report authorship and contributions fairly and disclose any potential conflicts of interest, whether financial or otherwise. 9. Do not plagiarize and be careful about self-plagiarism, that is, reusing your own text that you have used elsewhere. There are online plagiarism checkers you can use to check your work, but be aware that these don't include unpublished texts. So if you've submitted a manuscript but it's not published yet, that won't be picked up by the plagiarism checker. 10. And finally, images should be free from misleading manipulation. On this point, to avoid accidental manipulation, you should only minimally process your figures before submitting them to the journal. Your submitted images should faithfully represent the original image files. Any adjustments or processing software used should be stated. And it's important to keep copies of the original images, files, and metadata used to create your figures, as these may be requested by the journal during the review process. One important question that was not in the ACS list is how to handle artificial intelligence. I think the most important thing is to be transparent about how you're using it. The journals themselves are in the process of working out how to deal with the AI question, and so it's important to check on your journal's latest policy, your chosen journal's latest policy. They may well make a distinction between AI for improving language, which is very widespread and becoming accepted, and AI used within the study itself. In either case, explain what you did and with which tool. And now on to the manuscript itself. Manuscripts normally have the structure I've shown here, but there may be variations, in particular in terms of the format and placing of the methods and the results. So do check the requirements of your target journal. But you will certainly have an abstract and an introduction, methods, results, and discussion, as well as references, figures, and tables. You usually also have the opportunity to include supplementary material. This is the place to include large amounts of data that are of interest to your reader, but are not essential for understanding the manuscript. So let's start with the title. Here you need to include the most important information that will signal to your target audience that they should keep reading. Keep it concise and informative. What's appropriate for titles varies greatly across disciplines. Take a look at some articles published in your field and check the journal guidelines for character limits. Right, for your audience, who are they? Are they specialists in your specific field? Are they cross-disciplinary, or are they non-specialists? Find a way to pique your readers' interest. Give them enough information to keep them reading. And consider what about your article will be the most interesting to your audience. Most readers come to an article from a search engine, so take some time and incorporate important keywords into your title. In most cases, you shouldn't need to frame your title as a question. You have the answers. You know what you found. Writing your title as a question might draw readers in, but it's more likely to put them off. And don't sensationalize your research. Be honest with yourself about what you actually discovered. A sensationalized or dramatic title might make a few extra people read a bit further into your article, but you don't want them to be disappointed when they get to the results. In your title, don't make jokes. Puns can be easily misunderstood, and it can look like you aren't taking your own research very seriously. It's a question of the right title for the right audience. For a different sort of text, a funny title could work well. The easiest place to start writing is probably the methods section. Here you need to give enough detail about your experimental for other people to be able to repeat the work. Unless this is a combined methods and results section, don't include any data, results, figures, or tables, unless they explain a method or describe a material. You may need to include an ethical statement. You need to include the sources of equipment and chemicals, and if relevant, include any statistical analyses performed. Again, unless this is combined with the methods, the results section is the only place that new data should be presented. Give a brief description of what data in tables means, but don't just repeat this information in the text. State facts, but do not draw conclusions. That is for the discussion section. Figures and tables readily convey a large amount of information that is not easily expressed by text alone. Ensure that the meaning is clear and independent of the surrounding text, because people may just look at the figure or table and not read the text. For figures, make sure that all parts of the figure are clear. Use a standard font, check the labels are legible, and ensure the images are sharp. Label all important parts. Label the key sections and parts of schematic diagrams and photographs, and all axes, curves, and data sets in graphs and data plots. Make sure that titles and headings are clear and informative. Use scale bars in images and specify units whenever quantities are listed. Use keys and footnotes to explain abbreviations and symbols. Similarly, for tables, make sure they make sense without reference to the text, and ensure that there is a clear and concise legend, that data are divided into categories for clarity, that there is sufficient spacing between columns and rows, that font type and size are legible, and in this case, no units are provided because they're not needed, but do include them if they are relevant. Then you might like to work on your introduction. Here you start with a brief literature review that summarizes the background to your project, and you end with the rationale for your work. State the specific questions you asked and how you propose to answer them. Within the introduction, all statements of fact must be fully referenced and do not include any of your results. The discussion is where you interpret the results and discuss their implications. Summarize the key findings and their importance, but don't just repeat all the results and don't introduce new data. Explain the overall significance. What would you say to your friend about your work over a cup of chai? How does it relate to other people's findings? What new questions does it raise? What are the strengths and limitations of the data or methods? What are the possible implications? And then tie it back to the introduction. How do your results address the questions raised there? Once you've drafted your manuscript, double check that your references are correct, both in terms of content and how you cite them. Make sure you follow the journal style. Number the references as they appear in the text, and if referred to again, use the original number. It is very easy to get in a muddle with references, so I suggest you consider using a reference manager to organize them. Once your main text is drafted, you'll need to write a clear, concise abstract that will help readers decide whether they want to read your article. Bear in mind that the abstract needs to function as a standalone document, as it is the only part of your manuscript that many people will read, and make it as detailed as possible within the word limit. The opening couple of sentences should describe the issue you're dealing with. It should be the shortest part of the abstract and should very briefly outline what is already known about the subject, what is not known, and what your work intended to examine or resolve. The next couple of sentences should very briefly describe the methods you used. Then write 3 to 5 sentences on your results. Your most important results should be noted clearly and concisely, emphasizing those that were statistically significant, if that is relevant. The most important sentences are the final 2 or 3, which give the conclusion of your study. This is the "so what?" or "what does this really mean?" You may wish to express an opinion about the implications of the findings or their importance for the field. So do keep your abstract concise and to the point. Most journals have a maximum word count, so check the guidelines before you write it. Also, check to see which subheadings your journal requires, if any. Write for your audience. If you're writing for a general audience, keep your language as straightforward as possible. Focus on key results, conclusions, and take-home messages. There isn't room to include everything. Double and triple check your abstract for spelling and grammar errors. These kind of errors can give potential readers the impression that your research isn't sound. But don't sensationalize your research. Be realistic about it. Don't speculate about where this research might lead in the future. Limit yourself to its implications. Don't use abbreviations or acronyms unless absolutely necessary or unless they're widely known. Don't repeat yourself unnecessarily. So, for example, in the methods, if you say, "we used X technique," in the results, instead of saying, "using X technique we found," you just say, "we found." Don't include content that isn't covered in the main manuscript, and don't include citations or references. Anyone who does not have a conclusion or who concludes more research is needed should be soundly smacked about the head with the conference abstract book or journal. Now, this quotation might seem a bit harsh, but you do need to focus on what you actually found and what it means. So don't waste precious words on this kind of obvious statement. When your manuscript is ready, you will need to submit it to a journal and engage with the review process. As you prepare to submit your manuscript, as I've said several times already, read the journal instructions carefully. You may need to gather conflict of interest forms, author signatures, and more. Figures will need to be prepared in the correct format, and you need to prepare a cover letter. In your cover letter, you need to state what you're submitting, summarize the results and their implications, state why your work is of particular interest for the readers of the journal in question, and list any issues raised by the journal in its instructions for authors. Has it been submitted elsewhere previously? Are there conflicts of interest, etc.? You will probably have to submit your manuscript using an online platform with a series of windows and many fields to fill. It may be a bit confusing at first, but just take it step by step and you will get there. There will be lots of information to collect together and submit. The process might take you at least half a day, so do not attempt to do it in a rush. And the next time you do it, it will be much easier. So here we have a summary of what happens once you have submitted your manuscript with a rather optimistic timeline. Firstly, the journal will do some administrative checks, and you may be asked to make some adjustments to your submission. For example, you might have forgotten to include one of the declaration sections, or they might query whether you have permission to use a particular image. Then your manuscript is sent out to a number of your peers for their review. Once these reviewers reply to the journal will decide whether they are interested in publishing your work. If they are, they will send you the reviewer's comments and you will need to respond to them. Once you have responded, if the reviewers are happy with your answers, the journal will accept your manuscript. If the reviewers still have queries, you will need to respond to them in a second round of peer review. Once the journal has accepted your manuscript, they will prepare the proofs and send them to you. You will need to check these carefully and request any minor changes. At this point, no major changes to the manuscript can be made. Once you're satisfied with the proofs, you'll need to approve them, and then after this comes publication. Scientific journals began their lives as paper and ink. Manuscripts were accepted and collected and not published until they were combined and printed in paper journals. I remember searching through journals on library shelves during my PhD, and that was less than 30 years ago. And of course, now most articles are read online, but there is the memory of this past paper and ink practice for many journals. In practice, what this means is that many journals will accept your article and upload it to their website straight away, but it will not be included in a particular issue, so it won't yet be published in the original sense of the word with a full citation for many months. These early manuscripts are identified in some way. Here in the Journal of Medicinal Chemistry, they are called articles ASAP. As you'll see there, I've put a little yellow rectangle over that. However, for all intents and purposes, your article is published as soon as it appears on the journal website. Now, this process can take many months. If you've not heard anything from the journal after 3 months, do follow up with them to inquire about the status of your submission. And don't be discouraged if your manuscript receives negative criticism or is rejected. It is not unusual for articles to be rejected the first time. And reviewers' comments will help you to write a better article and are an opportunity for you to improve your writing skills. If you do have the opportunity to resubmit after addressing comments from reviewers, respond to them carefully, adapting your manuscript as far as possible. Explain why you did or did not make the changes requested. Give a neutral response and write back with a clear format. So all that is left for me now is to wish you all the very best with your scientific writing journey. I've included some links here that you might find useful. There are also some extra slides on writing a literature review and some more pointers for improving English grammar that you will see if you access the slide set later on. So, Dhanyavad, thank you for your attention, and I hope that this has been useful for you.
Thank you, Louise. Manisha, can we open the Q&A session?
Yeah, there are questions you can read from here. There are 2 questions, Maushami.
Okay. Okay, so there is a question on how to define the citation. Please define what is citation. Louise, do you want to comment on that?
Yes. So, say in the introduction of your manuscript, you have stated a fact about your area that's important for the readers. Then you want to say where that fact comes from. So, say you found a piece of information in somebody else's manuscript, you go to that manuscript and you get the reference for that, and you add that into your manuscript with a number that is connects back to the point in the introduction where you made that statement. So the statement's there, then there's a number, then you can look in your reference list at the bottom, and by the number will be a reference to where you originally found that piece of information.
Thanks, Louise. Hope it helps. There is also a question on what does peer review mean?
So this is when your article is sent out to other researchers who are your peers. So they are people who are working in the same or a very similar field as you. So that's what I talked about when you send your article to a journal, and it's your peers who look at what you've written and they will critique it. They will make an assessment of it. They will pick out any errors or things that could be improved, and they give you that feedback. So that's your peers reviewing your work.
Okay. There is a question on, can you please explain about the structure of review paper also?
Yes, that's a longer topic. I don't think we've really got time to do it now, but if you get hold of these slides afterwards, I've put a few slides in there that give advice about how to write a review. So I think that's probably the best way to do that.
Okay, so there is a question, if I write my article, how can I process to choose the journal that I can submit for publication? This is a question from Ina. I would suggest that once we share the recording, you will find the detail. Louise did mention about how to select which journal to prioritize. Maybe you can have a look. Louise, do you want to comment further?
Yeah, no, that's probably a good idea. Yeah. It's
Yes.
my 2 suggestions really were to talk with your people in your group, other people that you know working in the same area, and then the kind of papers that you would want to reference, see where they were published.
Okay, a lot of questions are coming up. I am just picking up quickly what I can see is that how can researchers leverage technology tools and resources to improve their scientific writing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess the main thing now would be AI. Yeah, and I'm sure there's plenty of AI tools out there. There's things like Grammarly. I believe never actually used that. I've heard that's good. ChatGPT can summarize things for you. Although, of course, you want to check what that produces because it's not always accurate. Yeah, I don't know a huge amount all the different sorts of AI possibilities that are out there. But yeah, they're certainly worth using, and you can use them to improve your language. But I think the big caveat is you need to check that the facts haven't been changed. yeah, so it's definitely something to look into, but I don't have a huge amount to say on that, I'm afraid.
So, how to handle reviewers' comments? Sometimes they are quite discouraging.
Yes, well, I think the first thing is probably not to take it personally. They don't know you. They're reviewing your work, and try and take it positively. See if there's a good reason for what they've said. Look into the reasons behind it, and then take it as an opportunity really to improve what you've done. Once you get over that initial emotional reaction, see, take it as an opportunity to improve your work, to address the issues they might have raised, because what they've written might actually be important for you to address. And if their comments are unfair, I guess just acknowledge that and respond back in a factual way, explaining why you hold your position. So take it as an opportunity to improve your paper and don't be discouraged by it. Though the reviewers are flawed too, they might not be entirely fair in what they're writing.
Okay. We have question. While citing from review article, which one should be cited in the manuscript? Original article or the review article?
My instinct would be to cite the original article, but then that assumes that you can get hold of the original article to read what it said. So yeah, if you can get hold of the original article yourself and read it, then cite that. But if you can't, I guess you're safer citing the review article.
There is a question from Anthony Charles. Which journal is the best to submit the manuscript? Those which are free or the paid one?
Well, I guess it depends what you mean by best. If you, and what's the most important to you. If you want people to be able to freely read your work, with it to not be behind a paywall, then you're better off submitting in a completely open journal. If you want to publish in a more prestigious journal, I guess often those are not openly available. So I think it depends a bit what your aim is. Difficult to say, and just because articles are behind journals are behind a paywall doesn't necessarily mean they're better. So there's different factors to bear in mind. Yeah. But personally, I think it's good to publish things openly if that's possible.
Maybe I take two more questions before we close this session. There are a lot of acknowledgement, appreciation for your talk, Louise. Participants did find it helpful. Give me a second. From Gitanjali Kapoor, do we write figure and table on top of graph table or below it?
I'm trying to think. I think I've seen usually table above and then figure below, but I don't think that's crucial. If you're not sure, I suggest that you look at a paper published in that journal and see what they've done and just copy that. Yeah, and when you submit the manuscript, quite often they ask you to submit figures separately and sometimes also tables separately in which case you can list the figure legends and even sometimes the table titles at the end of the manuscript. But yeah, have a look and see what others that's published in that journal have done.
Okay, and considering we are at the end of the time, the last question I am picking up is that how long to wait for a journal reply after submission? Sometimes journal takes months to revert back.
Yes, I've given this suggestion of 3 months after your initial submission. That's just a guideline. Yeah. But it's true, journals, they're like everybody else, they're under pressure and they don't necessarily always respond back. But if you're just getting no response at all, then yeah, I think there was a question about someone who'd been waiting 1.5 years or something and were wondering whether to retract it. I've never experienced that, but it does sound like something funny's going on there. Yeah. So there's your patience as well to bear in mind. Yeah.
Thank you all the participants for your thoughtful questions. I know there are many questions we are not able to answer now, but hopefully the recording you will have that would help you to rethink and probably have more clarity on what you are looking at. Okay. And thank you, Louise, for your time and sharing your input. We look forward to the next opportunity, and thanks everybody.
My pleasure. Thank you.